here. Today we have three inspirational speakers who really live up to the name of the panel, the pioneers of the Data for Good movement. I will just give you an overview of how this panel has been conceptualized. So each of the three speakers will have about 10 minutes to share with us the origins of their organizations, what are they working on now, and what are the challenges and opportunities that they see with their organization and Data for Good movement in the future. And let me first start with introducing Jake Porway from DataKind. And I first learned about DataKind from an article in Forbes where they wrote about wonderful work that Jake is doing with DataKind. From his bio, a couple of sentences. Jake is a machine learning and technology enthusiast who loves nothing more than seeing good values in data. Well said, Jake. He founded DataKind in the hopes of creating a world in which every social organization has access to data capacity to better serve humanity. Today, we have the honor of having Jake as the first speaker in this panel. So Jake, in about 10 minutes, would you please share with our audience the story of the origins of DataKind, what are you currently working on, and which challenges and opportunities you foresee for your organization and the use of data science, AI for social impact?
Absolutely, thanks. Can you all hear me okay?
Wonderful.
Excellent.
So good to see you.
Perfect, and you can see some slides coming up here, I take it as well?
It is coming. Very good. I think.
Well, as it is, I want to send just a huge thanks to having me here. I'm so honored to be a part of this conference and here with Kat. I've been a huge fan of since her USAID days. And of course, Rayid, godfather of the Data for Good movement. So I just want to say I'm thrilled to be here and a part of this conversation. And I start with this slide about standing on the shoulders of giants because even beyond my fellow panelists, the Data for Good movement sits on top of the Tech for Good movement, even the Union for Concerned Scientists, others who have thought about using technology and data for good. And so I'm going to tell my kind of personal origin story, but I hope that it's seen within that context that all of us, everyone listening to this, are part of this bigger, broader movement of people who want to use technology for the greater good. So I think my story probably starts along with a lot of folks around 2007 when the first iPhone came out. Because that to me was the symbol of like digitizing our world, right? Like all of a sudden you got all people walking around with cell phones, you've got satellites in the sky, laptops available. And as a machine learning PhD, there's this like sudden light bulb moment of like, oh my God, the data that we've been collecting in the lab is now going to come from the world. Like what could we learn from this data? What kind of models could we build? We could tackle so many interesting problems. And you kind of saw like industry catch up and start talking about data scientists being the sexiest job of the 21st century in 2011. Whether they'd stood up to the sexiness or not, I had the privilege of seeing that firsthand working at the New York Times in their R&D lab. It was kind of unique for a newspaper to have an R&D lab. The idea was we were going to try to understand how all this data could be used to learn new things about our world. And so at the time we were building things like tools that would see how social media flows from about the New York Times spread across the world. Again, kind of commonplace today, but at the time there was this real aha moment because here we were looking at data that no one had seen before with basically just our laptops. And so it was like just a matter of time before people are solving vaccine issues with this and understanding social movements with data. Like we're going to become a data-driven, smarter humanity. And so I was kind of surprised to find that like most of the work was being done like kind of solving first world problems, like making sure we know what we want to buy. And, you know, I love my Snuggie, but it just felt like for all this technology, there's got to be like something better we could do with it. And I had the good fortune of running into this guy, Jeff Hammerbacher, who echoed this perfectly, saying the best minds of my generation think about how to make people click ads. That sucks. And so I kind of agreed. I was like, yeah, that does suck, but what am I going to do about it? I just went about my life until the seed that was germinating in my mind kind of hit when I was at a data science conference and this woman ran in with a hard drive and she's like, I have all this data from health clinics in Uganda. Don't ask how I got it or why, but I have this, but what could I do with it? And I remember watching the Max Schroen, the data scientist from OkCupid at the time, sit down with her and just for 15 minutes go through all the things that they could do. They loaded up the data, so you could answer this question, that question. And she walked out like her eyes had been opened. She's like, oh my God, I gotta get back to the government and help them understand this. And I was like, you know what? That's the kind of thing we should do. How do we spend more time doing that? Helping NGOs and social problems understand what they can do with data science. The thing is, I thought it was a dumb idea. So I wrote a blog post on my website for calling for something called Data Without Borders. The idea would be like, it's like Doctors Without Borders for data geeks. But you have to understand, like, I didn't have any web presence. I put this on my website so people wouldn't see it because I thought it was such a dumb idea. And I just shared the link with like 8 friends in New York to be like, look, tell me what you think, sign up on the mailing list. You don't even have to reject me to my face. And you can imagine my surprise thinking no one could find this when in the coming weeks, we'd see hundreds, thousands of people sign up from around the world saying like, hey, I'm already doing data science for social good. Like, let's do this. People had spread the word. Folks like Tim O'Reilly from O'Reilly Media had tweeted about it. Before we knew it, there were just hundreds and thousands of people responding. I tell that story because, of course, a wild ride for me, but more importantly, it tells me from the start, this entire thing was movement driven. It was I didn't say, let's start DataKind or something. It was people who said, let's do this. And that is what was really exciting to me. So our task then was just to figure out what to do with all that energy. So I asked Drew Conway, my friend who you may know for that notorious data science Venn diagram, to figure out what to do with this. And we said, look, hackathons are all the rage. Why don't we just take those and make them kind of like a data for good version, something we called a data dive. And so we stood almost exactly 9 years ago today, held something called the New York Data Dive. We worked with the New York Civil Liberties Union, the UN, and a microfinance information exchange. And we didn't even know if anything was going to work. Like, would anyone show up? Would the NGOs be ready? Like, we didn't expect anything. And in fact, ended up being hugely successful. We had people, immediately fill up the registration list to come. We had plenty of data scientists. They worked alongside NGOs, actually solving problems together. And, the teams were like very relevant to today in the US, looking at stop and frisk data that no one was even able to visualize before. You have to remember, 2011 was kind of tough to visualize things like this. And so you had all these kind of like eye-opening moments from these NGOs, including one group who worked with the UN, got invited to go present their results at the General Assembly the next week. We had nothing to do with that. That just happened, right? You put smart people and motivated people in the room and it just rolled. So to me, that was, another step of the community stepping up and saying, yeah, we're actually going to keep, we're going to show up. They're not just going to sign up for a mailing list. We're here and we're delivering. And I really think everything from our story at DataKind really stemmed from that one event. We know we've done it in New York, but we first started by spreading and seeing if we could do it in other cities. So we went to San Francisco, we stopped by Chicago, went into DC and the World Bank, and everywhere across the board, communities showed up. I mean, no surprise to anyone here who's in the data science for good movement, but even at that time, it was just confirmed by so much energy. And so that was when a year later, we actually founded DataKind to say, hey, maybe we can continue to support these groups and just keep continuing this work forward. And I mentioned US cities, but pretty quickly it spread internationally. Folks in London did a data dive, and folks like the great Duncan Ross actually started a DataKind UK chapter. And then a year later, that became Bangalore, Singapore, Dublin, San Francisco, and DC. So immediately we saw, the community just spread. It's been great. And of course, that was back then. Now it's gone, further. Data science for social goods footprint, is almost fully global. So I think there's just been confirmation from the start that like the world and you all really stepped up to make this community continue to go big. Well, that would be fine if we're all just doing like weekend projects, but we also saw people go deep. This was one of the projects from one of the first data dives in DC, helping a group look at advocacy data about child well-being. Well, people didn't stop working after the weekend, of course. As many of you know, they just kept coming back weekend after weekend until they built a tool that ended up getting replicated across tons of other counties. And we saw this as well with groups that went to the World Bank and looked at nighttime illumination to estimate poverty, kind of a pet example model. I think that comes up all the time now. But they stuck around. They wrote a paper that got published. And so that was what inspired us to say, hey, there should be a longer program. We started our Data Core program because people just kept wanting to work on these projects. And now you see Data Core teams around the world doing things like working with Soil Haiti, which does dignified sanitation, but struggles to figure out how to route the sanitation effectively. So a bunch of machine learning experts wrote a routing algorithm for them that saved them over 10% of their resources, and they're now expanding to their COVID response. So we saw the community keep coming back and building tools. I mean, that's really awesome. And so at DataKind, we've continued this tradition forward. We're continuing to support these communities. We've got about 30,000 folks around the world working on these projects in 5 chapters, inching up on 400 projects. But before we turn to the conversation, the question is like, okay, great, there's a lot of excitement. community's done great stuff, but like, what's next? And so as Zaid asked, like, what are the challenges we're facing? Where do we go from here? I think the answers for DataKind are for the Data for Good movement as well. So I want to talk really quickly about 3 things I think we all need to focus on. Constructive vision for data science for good, deep focus on issues, and broad learning across. So in a total like super 30-second version. Constructive vision, I think we need to show the world what data science for good can do. I joked about Amazon being kind of a flippant use of data for good. And now, of course, there's like AI that will help you learn how to make pancakes. I think this is kind of a stupid use of the technology, frankly. But worse, we also know it's become malicious. We've seen data unravel democratic conversations, reinforce systemic biases, or even support genocide. I mean, these are like serious, serious harms. And like the stakes were high in 2011, they're incredibly high now. And so it's on us, I think, as the Data for Good movement to spell out a constructive vision of how this technology can be used. Not just push back against the bad things, but generate the good ones. And that requires community-based technology design. So I think that's one thing we must continue to do, say we are different than that default future. In terms of going deep, we were so fortunate to get this very generous grant from Rockefeller Foundation and MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth to kind of focus DataKind on what comes next. And one of the things we really want to focus on is focusing on issue areas, which we call impact practices. So the realization was like after hundreds of projects, you start to see people do a lot of the same stuff. And so the thinking is, what if we'd started with that approach from the start? What if we did like 5 microfinance projects? Could we learn a lot more about that? And again, I think that's good for DataKind, but also the whole Data for Good movement. What have we learned across all the projects we've done? So DataKind, we're focusing on frontline health systems and economic resilience and inclusive growth as our first 2 issue areas. And I think the thing to just kind of notice, they're multi-year focus areas. And the way we're trying to go about it is to actually say, like, look, where's their energy to actually go into these areas? So we're seeing foundations really focus on frontline health, like Rockefeller Foundation cares about precision public health, Living Goods and Last Mile Health, or NGOs using digital tools to bring frontline health workers to the new era. Botner Foundation doing AI for good. But where do we focus those energies? And so DataKind volunteers are working across whole cohorts of folks to find solutions that might not just work for one group, but for many, instead of just individual problems. One just quick example of that is a realization that digitization of forms is still a big issue for frontline health workers. So one team of volunteers built a tool that digitizes health forms for a group called Riders for Health. But these health forms are so common that the belief now that this works is that this will extend to entire like national level health systems. So where are the opportunities that we as a Data for Good movement could be finding these common problems? We'd love to talk about that if people are interested. The other issue on inclusive growth and economic resilience, we're working with data.org on their inclusive growth and recovery challenge. So keep your eyes peeled for some ways to get involved on that. And lastly, I'll just say in terms of a broad learning, I think we have a chance to define what data science period can be. At DataKind, we have a center of excellence that maps our best practices. But what are we as a movement learning about the best practices? You know, data science and AI isn't done consistently in business either. Could we define what it means to be done well, ethically? What about when you're doing it in the social space? I think there's huge opportunities there. We'd love to talk about that. Overall, that is kind of the origin story as I see it. And the thing that I really hope, the thread you pull through from this, is that from the start, this is a community-led movement. You all stepped up and said, we want to do data for good. And I think now that also means that there's a huge chance, actually a need, for all of us to be involved in shaping it moving forward. The problems, we've made progress, but the problems still exist in the world. And we're going to need data scientists, machine learning engineers, AI folks, all along the way, solving those problems ethically and capably. So I very much look forward to the conversation and look forward to seeing you all on the front lines. Thanks.
Wow, what a presentation, Jake. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much. I can see why so many people joined.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Really great things you did so far. May I kindly ask now to give a stage to the second speaker, Rayid Ghani from the DSSG Foundation. And before I continue with the introduction, I just wanted to tell to the audience, if you have questions, please write in chat, and then we will answer the questions on the first came, first served basis. Okay, so welcome, Rayid. Just a couple of words about him. So Rayid, Jake called him the godfather of Data for a Good movement. It's really nice. And Rayid is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University and works on developing and using machine learning, AI, and data science methods for solving high-impact social good and public policy problems in a fair and equitable way. And after his role as the chief scientist at Obama for America 2012 campaign, in 2013, Rayid started at the time at the University of Chicago, and since then runs the Data Science for Social Good Summer Fellowship, now at Carnegie Mellon University. And his work is the core of the DSSG Foundation that was formally established in 2019. Rayid, like for Jake, in about 10 minutes, would you please share with our audience the story of the origins of the DSSG? What are you currently working on, and which challenges and opportunities you foresee for the use of data science, AI for social impact? The stage is yours, Rayid. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Laith. It's good to be here. You know, it's unfortunate that it's virtual because the beach looks wonderful behind you. Just kidding. But yeah, before I start, you know, I think I want to acknowledge all the hard work that's been put into this event by the team at Nova, DSSG Portugal, So Good Data, Anna, Elise, Daniel, the rest of the team. Thank you for all the effort. You know, these things sound really easy to put together when you attend them or when you hear about them, but we all know how difficult and how much work goes into doing this. So one, I'm extremely thankful and also proud of all of you kind of for putting this together. The other good thing is that, Jake has said a lot of things I would have said anyway, so I don't need to say anything, right? I can just pontificate over things. I'm not sure about the Godfather thing. Maybe it's just the lack of hair, but then, we have Laith. So that's, I don't have to make that joke. But yeah, I mean, going back to why did this work start? Why did sort of data for social good, data science social good start? It's almost unfortunate that it had to start, right? I mean, Jake's story is amazing, but that story should never have happened, and same for me and same for all of us doing this work. Why should not it be used for social good? What else are we worried about? And that's I think that's the problem is it might be that a lot of this type of analysis, this type of work had origins in making more money, like a lot of things do. But I think it disturbingly and surprisingly and unfortunately took a long time. And we still are at the very early stages, right? So at least for me, the story I have is very similar to Jake's story, right? Where we're coming in to grad school and kind of looking at the world of machine learning and kind of getting excited by, well, wow, we can use this to solve a lot of problems, but then kind of getting distracted by the intellectual challenges of these. At least for me, it was, I found the methods and the math and the statistics and the machine learning piece intellectually challenging. And at that moment, the only problems that really existed where you could apply it to were in the corporate world. And kind of those existed. And so kind of going and starting to look at them, but then realizing, what am I doing? Those are not the things I care about. Care about very different things. And so how do we merge things that, for me, it was very much, here are the things I'm good at here, which is sort of, tech, data, machine learning type things. And then here are things I care about, which are improving society, working, with on education programs and health programs. And how do we merge the two things? How do we do this in a way that those two things don't live separately? And for me, the aha moment really came, I was giving a talk after the Obama campaign had finished, and certainly talked to a lot of students about what we had done. And I was telling them, look, these are all the same challenges and same things that we see in lots of social issues today, and that we can use the same type of technologies there. And what I expected, to be honest, was the response was going to be, yeah, we could do that. But one, there is no money in this. And two, these problems are not very sexy. And these problems are not very, attractive, and I can't really, talk about them. And what I heard was something very different that surprised me. What I heard was, we didn't realize that issues around health, education, environment, jobs could be tackled by the types of things that we are good at around data and machine learning and those type of things. And that's kind of what got me thinking about talking to different organizations, see what the needs are, what the problems are. And what we sort of found at that point was there were kind of three gaps that we noticed, right, for governments and nonprofits and other organizations trying to use data to do something useful. One was that they just didn't know what's possible. They had no idea what was possible. Either it was magic, where you mix these tools and magic comes out and all problems get fixed, or it was too hard, too difficult, not for the social good, but only for doing useless things like selling things to people that they don't need, or recommending books and movies that we don't care about. So that was one, is they just didn't know what was possible, what could be done. Second was that if they knew what was possible, what could be done, they didn't have people who could help them. A lot of the people there were very few people trained in doing it, right, which is still the case. But then those people were not going into these problems. And then the third thing was, not only people didn't know what was possible and didn't have people to do it, but it was also starting from scratch most of the time. If you wanted to do something that was, identifying which, if you're working in a social work agency and you want to identify which of your clients may not come back to you, so you pay extra attention, that's very similar to a telecommunications company, a mobile phone company, trying to figure out which customers are not going to come back. They don't start from scratch. They take existing tools for churn and start tweaking it, whereas a nonprofit or government would start from scratch. So there was a lack of examples, case studies, understanding of what was possible, lack of people who were both trained and understood these problems, and lack of tools to tackle these problems. And the DSSG was kind of just started at that point to really try to address these gaps. But same as Jake mentioned, you can have ideas, you can have fantasies, you can have wishes, but all of us on these panels, we're kind of helping these things make these things happen, but we're not making them happen. The work is really happening on the ground with the people who are doing these projects, who are jumping in and saying, I want to do this. I care about these issues. I have the skills. And that's been the most amazing piece of seeing this across organizations, across the world over the last so many years is so many people have come in wanting to help. And in various different ways. You saw Jake talk about a lot of the volunteers coming in and saying, we want to help do these things. You have seen people come in and organize events just like this one. We've seen people work on projects in dedicated ways. And from the side of the Data Science for Social Good efforts and the foundation, right, we've kind of focused on lots of work on going and doing projects that are deep, ranging from looking at Rayid and his team has been doing an amazing project the last couple of years with the unemployment agency in Portugal of identifying people who might be at risk of long-term unemployment and helping them to get jobs, and not just focusing on how do we most efficiently take into account these types of things. How do we solve these problems efficiently, but more importantly, do it in a way that's equitable. Same for a lot of work that we've been doing, both in the US and outside, on public health issues, on education, on criminal justice. So that's been kind of one effort, is trying to give examples across sectors, across regions, across problem areas, to show organizations what's possible. What can you do with this in healthcare? What can you do with this in education and employment and criminal justice? The second thing is, how do we then scale these things through tools and methodologies, right? Because again, starting from scratch is expensive, and it takes a while. So we focus on trying to build a lot of methodologies for how do we scope projects? How do we do bias and fairness audits? How do we do these toolkits that can make it easier for these organizations to build early warning systems, to build resource allocation type systems? And then perhaps sort of the biggest impact, at least from our side, has been at building a set of people, building a community. Because again, you can have all these examples, you can have all the tools, but if you don't have people who are both trained and passionate about these things, nothing will happen. And that's the most important piece, at least from our side, of how do we train the next set of people who are going to do this work, who again, both have to be trained while and have to care about these things. And I think that's when the summer fellowships that started initially at Chicago are now running in a lot of different universities. And the best piece of it, they're running somewhat independently as well. We've got University of Washington and Georgia Tech and British Columbia and Stanford and UMass Amherst and Virginia and Florida and Turing and Imperial and Nova and all these different programs running, which is so wonderful to see, right? So I think where are we kind of going from here, right? Or where are we? And in the beginning, a lot of this effort globally, I think, was let's do something, right? Let's start thinking about it and start doing something. But that was never enough. If it's not enough for a business to say let's do something with data, it definitely can't be good enough for us. Because we not only have to be, I think we sort of play a interesting role. The community that's doing this is still too small, right? It's growing. And, if we were doing a cheerleading thing, which I'm not very good at, we would sort of say, oh, we're so big and we're doing all the things and we're having so much impact. Yeah, some of those things are true, but it needs to be much, 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 much bigger. Every person doing anything with data has to be involved in this effort, because that's the only way we can change the outcomes that we care about, right? So doing something with data for good is not enough, right? We have to play this role of not just the people who are the technical people, but also the people who care about policies and outcomes and ethics and morals, right? We have to be part of the group that also defines what are we doing. We're not just taking requirements from somebody else and implementing them. We have to be part of that effort. We have to be trained how to do it. We have to be facilitators, and we have to do it well. We have to do it well, both in an evidence-based way, but we also do it well in a way that we have to be part of the value definition process, right? If a government comes to us or a nonprofit comes to us and say, hey, I need help in using data because I want to save money. Like, well, yes, but what are you going to do with that money that you save? Are you going to give it, to make more money for yourself and hoard it? Or are you going to use that money to improve the community, improve the outcomes, increase equity, increase fairness? And that's our job, to have that conversation. We can't just be the people who work with a nonprofit and do whatever they want, because none of us are in it to help organizations. None of us want to help. None of us care about a specific government agency, or shouldn't, or a nonprofit, right? We care about the people who we are trying to help, and we care about the community. We care about the people living in that those organizations are helping. And so our role is helping them, but we can't do it directly. So we're doing it through these intermediate organizations, government agencies, and nonprofits. What I want to end with is, like how can people who are here get involved? Like, a lot of you are working in the private sector, who are starting to work on sort of data science things. First thing is, in your current jobs, think about how you can have an impact towards making things more inclusive, more ethical, more data-driven. Ask questions. Use data to show, is your current company with their products and services reaching the people who need those services? Are they reaching them fairly and equitably? Outside your job, figure out local projects and local organizations that are working on these things. Can you help them? Borrow trust that DSSG, DataKind, Data.org, other organizations have, and built that relationship with. You're right now going to be in huge demand, right? Everybody is trying to hire you. And so the question is, what do you use that demand for? How do you tell your potential employers what you care about? Take a look at this. There's some work going on, and to push employees in sort of Facebook type organizations to say, we're leaving if you don't follow the values that we care about. Think about how you can do that, because you're in demand right now, and you have a big role to play in shaping how the world works. And so use it for good. Use it to do it in a way that's both fair and equitable, and an impact that you actually care about, that matches your values.
Right. This is a good moment to just have Katherine introduce her, if you don't mind, and then we'll have the audience asking questions via chat. Thank you very much, Ray. This was really a good add-on to what was Jake saying, and it was a pleasure having you here. If I may ask Anna to sort the stage, and in the meanwhile, I will introduce Katherine. I didn't know a lot about data.org, but then I went to their website. And if you have never visited the website, please go to data.org. I mean, it's really good one. They have inherited a lot of activities that were happening in the last couple of decades, and they're building upon them to add this data component. And Katherine, she's the Chief Operation Officer of data.org, and she is dedicated to building the field of data science for social impact with diverse partners across the world. Katherine supports civic tech movements across the globe to improve in-person and online connections for social entrepreneurship, local growth, and data justice. I will ask Anna if it's a possibility to bring Katherine to the stage so that so that we continue with Katherine. And as I think everyone, Jake, Rayid, and the others, Katherine is in many organizations trying to help. And through her organization, Open Data Collaboratives, Katherine has worked on data transparency with governments and civil society in Africa and Middle East. She also served in the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, under President Obama's Innovation and Transparency Initiative, building technology and collaboration in the U.S. foreign policy. Katherine, you know the drill by now, right? You have about 10 minutes. I am going to cough from time to time.
Yeah. Just like this to get off the stage.
Yes.
You deserve it. I'm handed one.
And will you share with us, with our audience, the story of the origins of data.org? What are you currently working on, and which challenges and opportunities you foresee for your organization and the use of data science for social impact?
Perfect. Happy to do that.
We're very pleased to have you.
Really pleased to be here. Thank you, Rayid. Thank you, Anna. Thank you to the whole team from DSSG who've put this together, and to everybody who's joining today, and obviously to Jake and Rayid. I always love the opportunity to talk with them and to also hear from everybody who is in this space. There's a lot of familiar faces and names on the people profile that I can see in this interface. So I'm grateful to you all for joining. And so I just to go into my own background so quickly is that as Rayid shared, I've been working for years on government transparency, open government, getting technologists to come and serve and work in government, which is still a huge problem if anybody has been following the Excel fiasco in COVID cases in the UK. Just the smallest amount of data literacy would have helped curb that problem. So there's still a huge opportunity there. But really, even beyond civic tech, there are need for technologists, for data literates, for data scientists in all kinds of life, in nonprofits, in the private sector focused on social impact, and in government too. So welcome you for all of that. And that's really the gap that I see and the work that we're trying to do at data.org. So let me try to share this tab that I have for you. See if this is working. Got it? Beautiful. Seems to see. You can see. So Rayid has already shared the mission of data.org. So we launched in January, trying to serve to build the field of data science for social impact. And as Rayid said, we're building this. This is not a brand new mission. This is work that has been done for years and for decades by people around the world, many of the names you've heard of, many people that you've never heard of before, but they're working tirelessly in this space. So we have this, so we have this mission. We want to serve as a platform for partnerships, because the way that you get this work done and sustained is not by doing it one at a time, but by having many different kinds of partners, many different kinds of organizations from different sectors, different expertise, different parts of the world working together. So we hope that data.org can help lift up and also connect many different people who have these shared goals and missions. And what are we trying to create? We're trying to work towards a world where data scientists, as Jake has shared, as Rayid has shared, choose and prioritize social impact, solving world's seemingly most difficult, seemingly most intractable, but also the most interesting problems that really are, they need a lot of talent and a lot of dedication to solve. And so we want to create a space where data scientists are imagining that's the career they're going into. They're starting organizations, they're starting companies, they're starting nonprofits where they've got that in mind to begin. So how do you do that? We've got 3 approaches that were taken: proving the case, strengthening capacity, and transforming the commons. So proving the case, what does that look like? We want to flood the market with examples of data science for social impact, great stories, great paths that many different people, those on the call on this session, could take in order to become a data scientist for social impact. So how do you do that? Well, in a pandemic, you get on a lot of Zoom calls and you tell stories. So here's our director of communications, and we have a small team. It's growing. I hope that we'll be able to announce some growth to it soon. But I will use any opportunity I can to share out our great team. So this is Costanza Scuba. She's actually speaking here in her capacity fighting misinformation. But a lot of the work in just the startup months that we've had is running these webinars, going into the spaces either where we have like-minded or people who've heard of data science, or they've heard of how to use data science for social impact, but they need to be convinced. So we're spending a lot of time sharing out stories there. We also support great data scientists in data visualization. Here's Humanitarian Data Exchange's Carol McInerney. She's got a data visualization of just one of their data points. She was able to find that there's 84 different instances of it across all of these different pieces of analysis, which, as most of you will know, provides a lot of great opportunity to draw some insights, some conclusions that could be very helpful, but it also creates de-identification. So the questions of privacy and security of the data, how the data could be used unintentionally for harm, that's really the work that needs to be at the forefront of the social impact and social good movement. If we surround ourselves only with people who are very like-minded and they're thinking of all the great things that we can do, we're going to lose a lot of the effects that we might not have caught otherwise. So having those diverse partnerships is really important. But as great as it is to hear examples from the communicators and from the people working in this space, my favorite is hearing from people who are directly affected. So this is actually a story that I'll share that DataKind put together. DataKind is one of our partners, as Jake mentioned, and there's a really lovely video about their work with John Jay College of criminal justice. Criminal justice needs a lot of reform, needs a lot of help, and they need talented people working there. So if you go to the data.org website, scroll to the bottom, there's like a 3-minute video that gives a summary. It's a great story. And it had real people who benefited. So these are just 5 of the hundreds of students that DataKind was able to help. So, and what they did was work with the university leadership. And they took over 10 years of data and tracking of the problems that they had with students who were reducing their grades and even dropping out of school. There's a huge problem with students wanting to work in criminal justice, but dropping out. And so they put together this analysis, they put together a predictive model, and then they worked with university leadership to say, here are the students that we think are at risk. What programs do you have? And the university was able to come with mentorship, training, tutoring, and other kinds of support to be able to get the students on track. And so, as you can see, the one of the speakers is saying that she stayed in, she got an A in class, and the numbers speak for themselves. It went from, I think it's 54% graduated in 2 years to 72% of the class graduated in 1 year. And it's just a huge leap. And it's really important when doing this work. It's not just a data science solution. You really do need to partner and work with the leadership in these institutions and in these organizations so that they can help out the people that they're serving. And so that brings me to our second pillar, which is capacity building. So we think of how do we help these organizations that want to bring on data scientists, these nonprofits, sometimes they're universities, who needs to be able to do their work better? And how can they bring on data scientists so that they have a good experience, so that they stay, and so that they have the capacity built for the organization overall. We're also working with private sector organizations that are data science rich, but they might not have the most interesting work that they're doing or the most social impact work. And finally, we're also working with universities that are working to build up, like Nova, to train this next generation of data scientists to pursue paths in social impact and social good. And that all comes because of people. So here is, oh, did it advance? No, did not. Who knows why? Okay.
But I'm sure he's gonna advance once.
There we go. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I forgot about this little sometimes delay. But so here is a great group of volunteers. This is a small sample. These are in the latest challenge that we ran, we had over 300 volunteers from DataKind come and join, and they all joined on Zoom. These are data scientists dedicating their time to social impact. And that's really what this is. It's about having people, as Jake has said, as Rayid has said, as Leid has said, it's about the people who are coming in and dedicating their time to this work. So forgive the fuzziness, but you can see there's an image behind there somewhere. And the third pillar is transforming the commons. So we think about how do we become wildly successful, and what do we do when we are wildly successful? What do we do when the leadership in nonprofits, in governments, and in private sector have data scientists for social good making the decisions? What do they need to be successful? What kind of policies do they need? What kind of frameworks for information sharing? What kind of raw data and resources do they need in order to be as successful as possible? So that's the third pillar, is what is the commons that we have to support? And we're really excited to be diving into this space. So I don't know, is it fuzzy for anybody else, or is it just on my view, do you think? A little fuzzy. I don't know why. But I can speak maybe, or I can just turn this off if you prefer. But I just wanted to share a little bit about the Inclusive Growth and Recovery Challenge, which we've just run. So our first endeavor as data.org was to have this global challenge to try to see how data science could be used to help support people who've had an economic downturn because of COVID, how to strengthen our communities in response. We used leave no person, place, or organization behind. This is the vision that we had. And if that sounds like the SDGs, you are right. That is the direction that we were going in. We had over 1,200 applications from 109 countries. Forgive the Mercator projection. It's absolutely not my favorite, but that's what it looks like really across the globe. We have people around the world who are saying, I know how to do this, and I know that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And even if I don't know the data science that well, I know it can be used. So help me understand data science better. Help me apply my data science. Help me apply data science to solve these big, important problems that I've been working in for my whole life. So how are we supporting these great organizations? Money, always helpful. Training to help build up their teams, and technical assistance. Because what you find in you're doing this space, if people knew how to fix a problem just by adding money to it, then so many issues would be fixed. But people need a lot of, especially when you're working with NGOs that are trying to shift their historic systems. If you're working with governments that are trying to update and adapt, they need a lot of support. They need data scientists that are coming in to help them out and train up their staff. Sometimes they need other kinds of training and marketing tools and software to help them. So if that makes you think that you want to join in, we want to hear from you. So we've got a lot of great people who are helping, but we welcome your role as well. And so you can email us here. And just to close out, to say, this work, it's not easy, but it's very, very rewarding. And so if you want to look like this at the end of the day, then really join, sign in. I see from this beautiful poll that Anna has put together and Daniel has, that most of you are coming in from the private sector and have not worked on a data science for social good project. And there are 100 opportunities for you. You can get in touch with me, Rayid, join up as a DataKind volunteer, and there is plenty that we would love to connect you with. So maybe we can share these out afterwards, but that's my contact and how to follow up. And thank y'all.
Yes, thank you very much, Catherine. I think there was a technical glitch, and it would be great if you can share your contact here on the chat on the stage, so people can get what they have missed from the presentation. And you know, when we talked just before the event, it was really. You were concerned whether there's going to be repetition, but now that I heard all of you, it was just so wonderfully, fitted into this whole story of the pioneers of data for good movement. And I want to thank you all for your presentations. It was wonderful to learn from you. And now, if you allow me, I will start answering the questions. So you in the audience, if you want to ask the questions, now is your time. As I mentioned before, we will answer them on the first come, first served basis. And so if your question is not answered, please forgive us. I will start with the first question, and I hope that all of the speakers are on the stage. So the first question is for Jake. Jake, the question was asked by Marilia Ferreira de Cunha. She asked, what would you have done differently while creating DataKind, knowing what you know now?
It's such a great question, and thank you for that. I think if you ask anyone who's done any long project or started an organization, there are so many things in retrospect you do differently. But I actually think if I had to pick one, I think it'd be most helpful. And for anyone getting into data for good, I'd recommend this as well. I probably would have focused earlier on what it was that was the most important thing for DataKind to do. What I mean by that is early on, one of the reasons we were able to get a lot of folks involved is we were doing data for good. Well, anyone can be a part of data for good. If you do database design and want to volunteer that, you do data for good. If you want to run events to teach people Excel, that's data for good. Anything could be data for good. So we had a lot of people involved. But then we had to make some really hard trade-offs between would we focus more on continuing a project forward, like let's say the sanitation project we were talking about. Well, not everyone could be involved in that. So is that still DataKind's mission? But if we expanded to everyone who wanted to be involved, some people wanted to, again, make like an Excel training program. Was that DataKind? So I think it was exciting because we had so much energy and so many people doing different things. But I think we probably could have actually gotten a little further if we had said early on, look, these types of projects are what we're going to focus on. There's lots of opportunity for, say, community events. This is what we focus on first. Again, and it's funny because, would I do it differently? I don't know. It helped us a lot to not have that focus at first. But I think where we are today, that's one of the first things that comes to mind. So I would say for anyone doing your own data for good journey or your own data for good organization, I think an important question to ask is this more about the data scientist experience as a volunteer? Because if so, that's a different thing than trying to progress an NGO's data capacity, which is also a different thing than trying to innovate a new data science solution. So it's not an easy question, but one that I would encourage folks to wrestle with if they're going on their own journey. But although it ends well, I'm very happy with where we are.
Thank you for your answer, Jake. It was very good. Anna asked a question. It's maybe we can also extend it to you guys. So if you all are to choose one top use case, problem plus analysis used, which one would you choose from your organization? So I asked this question to Jake, but I wanted to just spread it around and ask each of you this question. So pick one use case that you've seen made the most of the social impact. Jake, would you like to start first?
Happy to pass it to anyone else since I just answered the last one. Folks want to go first.
So I think, Catherine, you mentioned it just by the end, one of the cases, right? It was really good to see those people who actually were touched by the project that you have. Is that the one that you would pick, or you would pick any other?
I think this is a great one. I mean, it's we have this one. We have two other great organizations we've been working with, Benefits Data Trust, that creates profiles of people who are seeking federal support. So in the US, you need kind of a PhD in how to work through services that the federal government provides you. It can be really time consuming, really difficult. And so what BDT has done is essentially created an AI call center. So they have real people who are answering the calls so that you have that personal touch and that personal interface. But they put together a profile of the kinds of people who typically call in and what services they can match them to that the government is opening up and needing. And these services change all the time. So you really need to have really good systems and good databases of the different kinds of support that would be available. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that they're doing and really support, them. They've been able to get, I think, $3 billion worth of goods to people who are supposed to get them. But of course, you have to know exactly how to ask the US government for the support that they should just be giving to you right away. So, so really proud of the work they're doing, and also really proud of our other partner, Community Solutions. I can't just do two. Or I have to choose everybody that we have. It's Community Solutions, and they are looking at the problem of homelessness. Also a huge problem in the U.S., huge problem around the world, and they're both trying to digitize and make the process for being able to access a home much easier, reducing the number of steps by being able to work with municipalities to sync up and tighten up that process. They've also put together a predictive model of the biggest causes of homelessness so that they can work with the local governments. Again, it's matching up the data science and matching up the social impact experts, so in this case, government experts, on how they can get their services in place. In the US, a big cause of homelessness is veterans. So when the veterans are coming home and they know that they're going into certain cities, being able to line up those services so that there's support available for them.
Very good. Rayid, what would be your choice if you were to choose one that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, for somebody who's trying to be fair and equitable, I think choosing one is never fair or equitable, right? So I'll give some examples, not the best examples, just some things that highlight, again, the portfolio of things, right? So there's one kind of example of a project, again, is in criminal justice, because unfortunately criminal justice is totally broken in the US, is work that we've been doing in Kansas, in a county called Johnson County, for a few years. And the reason I sort of use that as an example is it sort of shows us, one, the collaborative, interdisciplinary, all the buzzwords that we hear really come together, right? So the idea there was this county had a high recidivism rate in their jails. And root cause of that, one of them was mental health needs that were unmet, right? So they wanted to kind of figure out, they had some limited resources to allocate towards proactive mental health outreach. And they came to us to help with saying, how do we figure out who to allocate those resources to? We have a couple of hundred people we can outreach every month. And what started off as, let's get data across health systems, criminal justice, police, and mental health, and figure out who are the people actually at risk. We know we can do that really well, right? We know how to do prediction stuff, but all that is useless if we can't reduce their risk of coming back to jail. So the next piece was trying to figure out who has these, who has unmet needs. And then the third piece was putting it all together to actually run a trial to see, does intervening on these people through mental health outreach reduce their risk of recidivism? And does it do it in a way that's again, equitable, right? It's easy to sort of be efficient and say, I'm going to just help as many people as possible, but that's not the policy goal. And so the question was, how do we get them to think about equity as a policy goal? How do we make it analytical, quantitative, so that it connects with these resource allocation? How do we then run an actual trial? So that trial has been running for about a year and a few months. So we're getting that data back now. And in parallel, what's happened is that by doing this work, they started seeing the value of how can data be used to do this. We helped them hire a person into their team who is the machine learning type person now. We helped them train that person as well as additional people from the county. And now they're sort of, the system is kind of running, in the beginning, we were running and giving them this list, and then they were generating it in parallel to see if they're doing the right thing. And then they started generating it, and we're checking. And so the reason I'm giving the example is, one is sort of it starts from the beginning of, here's a vague problem of reducing recidivism, to a very concrete system and intervention, to then an end-to-end sort of trial, validation, deployment, and then in building internal capacity to go from this project to other projects. And so that's kind of, I like this as an example of, it's not about one thing, right? Any one thing would not have been totally effective. They might have had a short-term impact, but all of these things together get you the real kind of long-term impact that we're all trying to do.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Rayid. And I think now the ball is bouncing back to Jake,
Able to pass it around for a bit. So well, so I'll say, we had mentioned backstage that we might have a little bit of a debate here, potentially. So I want to say something provocative about how we pick high impact areas. The short answer is, I think one of the best areas would be frontline health systems, one of our first impact practice, because improving health around the world is just going to generate a ton of other positive outcomes. And you've got so many data scienceable opportunities in just predicting supply shortages, anticipating where vaccines need to move, that are really kind of like low-hanging fruit. So that's kind of my short answer. Well, my longer answer for how we assess these areas is, first, I just personally, my own kind of moral philosophy of the world is you should tackle the kind of core human needs first: food, water, shelter. Without those things, it's really hard to think about other things like, equality or ending armed conflict. That's not everyone's view, and it doesn't have to be, but that's where I personally sit. So that's where I think those things are critical to solve first. My controversial take is data science, super good. If you think about statistical modeling or you think about algorithms, really good for operational efficiency. They have a lot less power in areas where the actual system design is working against your goals. So, right, I actually want to be proven wrong on this. And because you brought it up, I'm hoping that you will be able to do this. I would say criminal justice in the US is a really tough area for data science because, in my view of where it should be used, like the issue is not one of resource allocation, which algorithms could help with because they can either automate a human process or predict where something should happen. But we know certainly in the US, like we have a lot of systemic issues with our criminal justice system. And we still see cases where the redlining, where loans were only given to usually white folks, and certainly Black people were kept out of getting loans in certain areas if they lived in a region, if people aren't familiar with that term outside of the US, that suppressed the wealth of Black populations and still seems to be the geographical boundaries upon which Black people are still sort of less underserved. And so I want to be wrong, but I'm kind of bearish on the idea that a predictive model or more data is the solution to that problem, or the most leveraged tool for that problem. I think you have inherent biases, power issues, and dynamics at play. So I say that because I don't want to be a wet blanket. Again, I want to be proven wrong. I want to believe that our technology can actually solve every issue I care about. But when I think about where we spend our time, I keep going back to the cases where people are largely aligned on the outcome, like let's vaccinate a population, but we just need to do it efficiently, versus one where we actually have like human issues of greed and fear to tackle. And that's, US racism, that could also be anti-Semitism in other countries, that could be different racial divides, class divides. That's what I struggle with that. So that's my thought on that. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts though.
I mean, so I agree with you that I think criminal justice is I agree with you that criminal justice has racism. I don't think has more racism than any other area in the US. Everything has racism, right? What does not have racism? Education is racism, health is racism, social service is racism, housing is racism, transportation is racism, employment is racism. And I think my view is this is my personal view, right? I think the conversations I have from people are kind of two types. One set of people say, well, there are systemic issues and we need to completely destroy the system rather than make incremental fixes. I personally don't agree with that because the probability of success for me is much higher. Every day I don't do something, people get hurt. Not me, but and so yes, we should look for systemic, long-term, fundamental changes. But in the meantime, I feel like it's our responsibility to also help the people who are currently facing these issues, right? Now, the good thing is the US federal system is not very effective at doing anything. And so a lot of the criminal justice things really happen at the state and local level. And when we partner with an organization, we have a lot of these ethical policy questions up front about what is your goal? What do you care about? and we'll only work with people. So yeah, you're right that there are many states, cities, counties where the issue is not about data at all or about technology. It's about actual values that they care about and the policies. But there are also exceptions in many places where we've been doing. The example I was giving on the criminal justice side in this county was there are a lot of counties that talk about reducing recidivism, but they don't know how to do it, right? So for the idea behind this project was to sort of say, look, you have the right policies in mind. You don't know how to actually go from the macro policy to the micro implementation. And that's where data was helpful. By itself, data and tech and all that stuff are useless, right? We know that. We can keep churning data and nothing changes in the world because our computers can't do anything in the world. But when you have buy-in top down and bottom up in a government agency, they want to do the right thing. One is to sort of help them do that. But I think for me, the more important piece is now we've created an example of how other similar counties with the same mission and same goals can actually do this work, right? And don't get me wrong, right? This has been going on for about 4 years. So this is not a low-hanging fruit. So I'm with you. I think none of the projects we're talking about, the data was the critical piece, right? Everything else had to be there, and then data was the little missing piece that we plugged in, and it made things a little bit better. Just by itself, it's useless, and added, it has some incremental impact, but it doesn't change the world. People do, unfortunately, and so I think we agree on that level. But I for us, it was a lot about trying to find organizations who want to do the right thing, have the right mission, have the right values, and can, with a little bit of help, get there. And yeah,
I love it. I don't know if everyone can get to answer or leads, but that last point I think is critical, and we do totally agree on. You find folks with the right values and mission alignment. That's like step one more than anything. I love that.
That is very good, and I'm thankful for provocation and for some more discussion. Oh, yeah. It was very useful. I'm getting some cuts. I cannot hear you very well. I hope the others are not. But not just at the very moment when we started laughing and chatting. So all the discussions were great. Now let me move to another question that will still last, I think, a lot, because it's a kind of a provocation. And not to stop the fun, but we are ending in 14 minutes sharp because there are other things happening. So I'll start with a question from Bernardo Caldas, who said, a follow-up to Anna's question. How do you actually measure impact in social good projects? In industry, it's way easier. It's just euros, dollars. How do you do that in social goods? Good arena. Somebody, do you want to start, Jake? I mean, it was
I'll give a capsule and then pass it around. So I think that's such an astute question, and to Kat's point that many folks are just beginning their data science for social good journey. I think this is one of the hidden challenges in this space. I think the easy answer is, you can map some stuff back to something similar to profits. You're right. Businesses, you always just say, did money go up? A little more nuanced than that, but closely, did money go up? Then we're winning. Social sector is a little more difficult. One way we talk about it at DataKind is we think time and money saved is a useful common factor. So if you can say, hey, we found an organization with a proven intervention, this group has been shown through measurement and evaluation that when they bring their water pumps to this area, more people get water. It's a good thing. Then if you can say, hey, kind of a little more upstream, we helped them with an algorithm to deploy these pumps to the most effective places, then it's not too hard to say, well, since we saved them time and money, they could release more pumps. The pumps are good. Voila. That's a little bit of a kind of mirroring trick we use. I'm curious to hear what the other panelists think about this. I think one thing that we just have to acknowledge, though, is the reason there isn't a common metric is because, if you were to try to build a common metric for what social impact was, you would have to quantify your worldview. What is a good world? Not to get too heady and 4 a.m. college dorm chat, but deciding what is good and what is bad is very much a policy decision. This is why we have philosophy and why we have politics. And the real challenge is with data science, you have to write an objective function, right? For an algorithm, you have to quantify it. They say, this is the thing we're aiming for. And that is always an intention. So I want to say there is a short, closer in, like easier version of like time saved, money saved. But I think the question you're hinting at is actually a much bigger philosophical question about what do we think quantified or even a good one. A lot more thoughts on that, but I want to hear what others think.
So who is Catherine? Do you want to give your 5 cents or Rayid?
Let Catherine go first since I've been talking a lot.
But we'd love to hear. I think the question of how you can measure impact, this is why we think of these questions, these issues as the most interesting problems. It's, for some people, maybe it's absolutely fascinating how to get better clicks and how to earn more money. These are difficult problems to solve. They're interesting sort of technical problems to solve, but it's not that interesting. It's, the results and the outcome aren't as strong. DataKind calls these wicked problems. It's so needy, it's so involved that there are many different ways of measuring outcomes and whether you've been able to have impact. And that's really the goal, I think, of everybody who is on this session and who have dialed in, is that, it's data science for social impact. How do you match these different kinds of philosophies and viewpoints, different kinds of training together? And I don't know how you do it without partnership. So we have, a lot of these examples, and just to go back to Jake's provocation, that, perhaps the system itself is problematic. So if you just apply data science to make the system more efficient, it'll just do more harm more quickly. So it depends who you're partnering with, who's helping you identify what the problem actually is, and who's helping you actually identify the outcome. And, I'll just say that in the work that we've all been doing, definitely in the work that I did for US government, the work from the challenge, you get a lot of applications that come in that siphon data and are solving problems in non-Western democracies. And there's a lot of data to be had. There's very few that come with direct partnerships with people who are living an experience and whose lives would be affected by whatever solution you might come with as an outcome. And the problem with that is that you might think that you had a great success, but you didn't actually help, and you might have actually done harm. So there's an example of this organization called Foresee in Uganda. They're the Busoga Rural Open Source and Development Initiative. They work with farmers in Uganda. And they've been tracking the outcome of this big investment to make sure that farmers could get more money. So how do we make sure farmers get more money? How do we do economic growth? And so there were all of this analysis and all of this data collected about these trainings to get farmers to have great fields that were growing one crop. So one crop got grown and people got a lot more money from the crop that was grown. They bought more land, they grew more crops, but then people got sick. Because it turns out you have to have more than one food source in your diet. And if you're living in a very rural place where there's not a lot of access to diversity and you've taken over all the local farmland to grow a single crop, people were getting sick. So on paper, the goal that they had was to raise money. They showed that they increased the money, but they didn't actually increase well-being. And they would have known that if there were better partnerships and interactions and collaborations with people who are directly affected. So I would say that if you're looking for how do you measure social impact, whose life are you trying to affect, and are they part of your design and your solution?
So Rayid, your 5 cents?
I guess we start by saying, it's sort of, we think it's easy for even the for-profit sector to measure impact, and it's not. Right? Dollars is not the metric, right? Sometimes it's market share, sometimes it's shareholder value, sometimes it's profit, sometimes it's revenue, sometimes for ridiculous reasons it's eyeballs. Who cares about eyeballs? But that's the currency a lot of startups use, right? And so I think I sort of think about, the impact that we want to have is again, as both Kat and Jake were saying, it has to be sort of increase in the values that we want the world wants, right? And our role is to help achieve those values. Our role is not necessarily to tell them about or design those values, but we also can't be agnostic to the values because we have certain values and hopefully they match, right? So to poke Jake further, I'll give another example from criminal justice because that's the one that sort of illustrates the point, but in any area. But this example is from some work in Los Angeles. Again, criminal justice with their city attorney's office. And the project we're doing with them was about sort of, again, reducing a different type of recidivism around misdemeanors. And they kind of wanted a system that would sort of efficiently identify people that they could help, again, proactively. And when we built the system, we said, look, here's the most efficient system we've built. It's, about 75% efficient, but it has a higher error rate for Hispanic people than white people. And Hispanic people already have a high recidivism rate. So, and so here's option number 2, right? We said, okay, that's, when you say something to a government agency or policymaker, say, okay, well, what does that mean? I want to be efficient, of course. I don't want to waste money. And so, okay, if you deploy this system, here's what happens. Today, Hispanic recidivism rate and white recidivism rate. If you deploy a system like this, that's going to help both groups, but it's going to help one group more than the other. 5 years down the road, you're going to see both recidivism rates go down, but the disparity increase. Option number 2 is you build a system that's over. When I say system, I don't mean a machine learning system. It's algorithms, data, people all combined, right? If you build a system that's equally good for both, that gets to equality, right? So it keeps the status quo disparity and reduces it, but it keeps the disparity the same. The rates go down, but they both have the same difference. So it doesn't increase disparity, but it propagates existing systemic issues that are there. But that's, it costs another 2% more in efficiency. Here's option number 3, which is a system that's much better for Hispanic people than white people. And if you deploy that, it's going to decrease the disparities and get to equity in recidivism rate. So now we've kind of given them this policy menu. There 1, 2, and 3. Policy 1 is efficiency focused. It costs whatever. It's 72% efficient and results in increased disparity. Option number 2 is it's only 70% efficient, keeps the status quo. Number 3 is slightly, about the same, but reduces the disparity and gets to equity. I think part of it is sort of having these, they're picking number 3, of course, but I think that the question was sort of how, we have to be kind of involved in these conversations and making these values explicit. Today, a lot of this stuff, as Jake was saying, it sort of gets implied and gets sort of, very subjective. And now these types of systems are requiring these things to be put into code. 1, we don't have the training to do that. But 2, it's sort of forcing policymakers to kind of think about these things much more connotatively. And I think there are pros and cons here, but I guess the point and kind of what I was trying to make is that we kind of need to have more of these types of conversations where we're doing this translations between policy, world outcome, impact, what we care about, and then all the math and data and tech stuff is in the back end trying to achieve those things. It doesn't, I think once we have the policy piece right, things become a lot easier to deal with. But I think that the subjective nature of some of these policies, we never talk about them in connotative terms. We just talk about them in qualitative terms. And I think it's a good forcing function to kind of talk about what do we care about, and then go from there.
Okay, so wonderful discussion. I've been hearing from people around that they would really like to have a quick and good answer on this question. Unfortunately, it seems that there is not a one and simple answer for these. We have time for one more question, if you agree with that. And I've been asked to, well, not I've been asked, but there was a question that is, I think many of the folks who are in this Data for Good movements are asking, and it's intended for Rayid and Jake, but also you can join in Katherine, any thoughts on how to make the data for good movement sustainable? And I mean here, how do we make it something that creates jobs for people so that they can tackle these problems rather than through volunteering? It was a question asked by Danielle Nisani. Anyone? You want to go, Rayid, first? Yeah. When you're on the move, and then we can.
I'll keep it extremely short. I find this question a little bit personally. I'll start the conversation. I find this question somewhat troubling because we don't go to a homeless shelter and ask them, how do you plan on being sustainable? We don't go to a food bank and say, how do you want to be sustainable? They provide a service to the world. We value that service. If it's increasing the values that we care about in the world, we support it. And I think that's the same for our work. I think that, I'm sure Jake and Kat will have better business case answers, and I've given those answers too. But right now, my answer is, if this is something that's providing value and making the world more like we want it to be, we have to get donors, companies, and then to support it. And I think that's something we have to push for. But that can't be the only thing. I think it has to combine other things. But at least I'll give that answer, and then the other people give more reasonable answers.
Yes, because for the being mindful of the time, we have to keep it short. Katherine, how about you? I don't know whether it's muted.
Go on mute and then agree with Rayid. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to drive service. Service as a value is really important. But that's the work that what data.org is trying to do. And many organizations like this is to ensure that there's enough capacity in NGOs, that they can be streamlined, that they can have a space where data scientists will feel fulfilled, and so that they can hire and sustain data scientists. And also for all of you who are working in private sector organizations, that you need the leadership that wants to change the mission or wants to change the priorities in your organization, but it only gets sustained by the people who are working in there.
Thank you very much, Katherine. It was short and right on time. And Jake, it's your final, your opening and your closing.
I'll close by being efficient and say I'm going to write my answer in the chat, but pay people to do this work, and that's the way to do it.
Okay.